Hello?
Oh, thank you.
Your weed limit?
Yeah, weed limit 60.
Hello, 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 hello.
69.
You don't have to lean that close.
That
Why are you doing this?
was my Lana Del Rey impersonation.
I feel like I'm gonna trip over this.
I hate you. I never want to do anything with you ever again.
You will. Just like,
Are we doing a real sound test?
hello?
Here, I'll do it.
Yeah, do you want to do it?
This is a real sound test that we're doing right now.
Yeah, but you're
we're
leaning
making.
very close to the mic. We shouldn't have to lean. Do we have to
Okay,
lean
it's
back?
good.
Never mind.
I'm leaning because she's here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Just like,
I'm getting up in her business. I'm adding her with my whole body.
I'm gonna like spin in the chair. I should use the chair. I'm just gonna spin.
I'm just gonna be like, so anyway, I have to talk about my.
oh fuck.
That's gonna be me.
I'm sure everyone that doesn't know us thinks we're just,
Assholes.
yeah, just pure unfiltered assholes right now.
So like you saw.
Who are these people?
You're fine.
Whatever. Doesn't even fucking matter. Oh hell yeah!
About that.
Yeah, you like that.
You're about to get Xbox in here.
Oh, dang.
About to get Xbox in here.
Just like, I want to capture that laughter, like, sound effect.
God. I'm way too tired for this. Stop. That was your t-shirt? I'm just done.
Sorry, I have no authority here.
Listen,
Oh my god.
listen. I was at KMH for Gregorian calendar year yesterday,
No.
and I have a 9 to 5 job, and now I'm here.
Okay.
I'm tired.
5. Oh.
Did I prank you? Xbox. Do the do.
Do. So I'm gonna keep the timer running on my phone because this thing started like half an hour ago.
Well, you can exit out and try again.
But what if it breaks? What if it stops working? That's what I'm afraid. I'm like, what if only this one time it works? Like, I'm just afraid, like, I'll exit and, like, no, you can't put it back on again.
Should we like figure out our formation?
For what?
Like our formation? Are
Like-
we doing like Canada Goose formation? Like Charlie's Angels?
We
Should I
can
be,
do, like,
here?
people standing next to each other formation. So, like, in the order that we're speaking.
Oh.
Or if you
then-
two guys want to grab chairs and sit towards the front. That way people can see you.
Wait, are they gonna see me on here? Or does it not? Oh,
What?
they're gonna just be seeing the slide.
Yeah, they're not gonna
Okay,
see us.
then.
No, oh, I meant people. I meant the people like that are in here physically.
Oh, well, yeah. They can see. I'm around.
Yeah, you're here.
Let me get a spinny chair. What is spinny chair?
Yeah, you can put my stuff on that chair.
And we can switch. And also, I'll be less distracted if I sit down. Because I'm extremely distracted right now.
I drank coffee and ate a whole burger, so I'm just like,
You want to shut up? I know you do. I know that face. You can't do this to me. I thought we were friends.
well, you're not close to the.
Yeah, no, I did whisper that bit.
It's all good. Yeah, so anything. So if you have to say anything that you don't want people to hear, please whisper it.
I've said everything on the internet. It's fine.
That's true. I think we've all. The one thing I haven't said is how much you
We're gonna get banned after this.
Just get expelled from the your co-director.
everyone's here or?
Where is Caitlin?
Oh, I think most people are checking it out. Yeah. Cool. Welcome everybody. Hi Jillian. Hi. Good to see you. Not to say anything about that was so rude. My name is Jenny Robinson Faber. I'm the executive director of Dames Thinking Games. If you haven't been here before, and I see some new faces, which is super exciting. We are a nonprofit video game arts organization. We support queer and genderqueer, two-spirit, non-binary, femme people, trans and cis women who are interested in video games, all aspects of it, from designing them, to developing them, to writing about them, to playing them, to criticizing them. And we do it in this space that we call home, which is Gamma Space. It's a co-working space during the day for game developers. We also hold all sorts of events almost every single night, and you might notice that we're bursting at the seams. We'll be moving into our new space right down the road, the Toronto Media Arts Centre, in the very near future, where DMG will have our very own classroom space, a gallery that will have dedicated space for video games to be exhibited year-round, a cinema that is shared with the other organizations in the space, and all sorts of other extremely exciting things for video games. For video games! Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm super excited to see Gabby, Leisha, and Rael introduce this topic, which is one we talk about around here all the time. So I think you're in for a treat in seeing the way that they present this, and I believe this will have a wonderful impact on the games that you make and the way that you talk about creating characters in your games. So take it away, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that. So hi, everyone. And thank you for coming tonight to attend this workshop, even despite the weather outside. So I'm just going to start off with just some brief housekeeping notes. So first, I'd like to acknowledge that we stand on the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we stand today. And as someone who comes from a family with roots in the Guarani Nation situated in South America, I am committed to respecting the original and true caretakers of the land in this region. So I'm not just saying this land acknowledgement for show, it's a commitment. Secondly, I'd like to thank Dames Thinking Games, programming and community promotion committees for their support in this and for hooking us up with live streaming and everything. So, just a bit about us. So the way things will work tonight, we'll have our own dedicated section of slides where we'll talk about different aspects of character creation. We'll each get a chance to introduce ourselves, talk about our work, and go over the topics that we kind of are looking at separately. And we'll provide instruction on some exercises we'll be doing. So if you have a laptop or a notebook or something to write or type on, that's good. And we hope that by the end of the night, you'll walk away with a renewed or a new perspective on character creation. So some important things to clarify on what we're not here to do and what we are here to do. So what we're not here to do is to enable any oppressive or racist stereotypes or sign off on extremely problematic portrayals of race. So we're not here to clear your conscience. We're not here to sign off on stuff. We're not here to create perfect representations of race. Nobody here is perfect, and neither, you can't expect us to create like perfection. So as people of color, it's fair to give people of color room to make mistakes, but also to take accountability. So we're not just like tools that will be used for like creating your ideal person of color character. But what we are here to do is give tips on how to push away racist and oppressive stereotypes, as well as give perspective on creating racialized characters. So of course, we're here to give feedback to anything that you might be creating tonight. We're here to give tips, we're here to give support. So it's something that we're dedicated to do. So by the end of the night, you'll hopefully have a frame of a character to take away. So it might not be like a fully fleshed out character, but each of us will be going over a different exercise at the end of our sections that will build towards creating a character. So if you can read the slides, I'll be going over like world building, so creating the setting that your character will be inhabiting. Then we'll go over, like Leisha will go over more stuff related to wardrobe, and Rael will go more over stuff like related to a character's personality. And then kind of bringing all those together at the end and seeing how they all melt together. So I'll be going first. So about me. So I'm a co-director at Dames Making Games, have been since 2016. And I've also been making games for the past 2 years. I graduated from animation, from game animation, so I usually went into games to study the more like visual aspects of it, but then I got into game making after I joined Dames Making Games. And I'm currently working on my game, Don't Wake the Night, which is like a 2D point-and-click game that's being made thanks in part to the Emerging Media Arts Fund from the Ontario Arts Council. So that's how I'm able to develop that project. So what I'll be going over, my slides, so these are the main points I'll be going over. So basically, when it comes to world building, stuff about building a fantasy world that has original kind of storytelling, so it's not just a replica of our same systems of oppression, like replacing people of color with monsters or aliens. Because that is pretty common in fantasy stories, especially in games. And often I find that can be something very hollow. And I understand that replacing people of color with monsters and aliens, like sometimes writers, they genuinely want to communicate, they want to teach players about how racism works and what is racism, and like even if like their intention is noble, the execution is still very lacking, and at the end of the day, like it does not actually communicate what racism is effectively. And then I'll also go over incorporating subtle cues in design, so things like clothing, language, naming conventions, and how that you can use that to kind of express a story without having to like create a lot of extensive written background around it. And the last point also, and this is a big one, so I'll also be going over how colonialism is deeply embedded in like our worldview, whether it's about discovery or exploration. It deeply affects how we view that and how we create stories around that. So, for example, like one form of like colonialism and storytelling is how we define societies of people, or like if you're creating a race of people, how you're defining them and how they're usually defined a lot of the time by what their oppressors did to them. So to start off with this image, I really like this image because it kind of encapsulates something that I believe in strongly when it comes to like just overall design. So focusing on world building and how you'll get your character fit inside of it. So if you're creating a world from scratch, what type of realism does your world follow? Your character design is a good way to tell stories rather than just focusing on the realism of the design. So when you design your character, like something about them, like it can tell a whole story without having to actually put it into words. So you can tell us something about the character through the design that we can't assume just from applying rules of realism from our world. So when you're creating a whole world from scratch, you're also creating its own realism. So like what is real, like what is realism in that universe versus what's realism in our universe. So in my game, in Don't Wake the Night, which is, it's all 2D art, so all the characters have similar silhouettes, and they have similar clothing, so everyone kind of wears like long dresses or long cloaks, so they all have a similar silhouette. And each outfit, they all have variations as to like whether they're showing their arms or they're not showing their arms. So for example, the character on the left there, she has her arms underneath a cloak, so you mostly just see her hands, whereas the character on the right, she doesn't have anything like on top of her, so then you can actually see her arms. So then that kind of mobility also affects like how just like how open or closed the character is. And you can also see that their feet are also not showing. So for my game, it's mostly because I don't like drawing feet, but all of my characters don't have their feet showing throughout the game. Like you never see their feet because they're wearing really long robes or dresses. And that's also to give the impression that they're always kind of gliding around. So it's kind of like a soft movement. You never actually see them stepping. And another characteristic of their design is that they wear masks. So they each have a mask that describes like their personality and their role in the community. So, and this is all heavily based after like my own cultural upbringing. So someone who was raised the same way as me like could see this and like get it right away. Whereas if like you are not familiar with it, you might have a little bit more time understanding it, which means that I did have to kind of adapt something so that it fits within the fantasy world, but still respects what is actually real in our world. So for example, relating animals with indigenous people can be very, very problematic because depending on how much you relate them together, you can easily kind of tread on ground that is like, oh, they're just like animals, and you're kind of like doing that parallel, and it's not very positive. So what I did basically here is that they each have like this animal associated to them, but I was careful to think about like the characteristics of each animal. So for example, the character on the left is associated with the jaguar, and that's like a very powerful kind of animal, and within my own cultural folklore, it's something that is like a jaguar demonstrates a lot of like forwardness, a lot of strength. So this character, she's very strong, not physically, but in character, she's very present all the time. So that's why I kind of link those two together. So she's not actually like physically like a jaguar. Like that would be more, that might start getting into like problematic territory. And then the character on the right, she is related to the fox. So that's because she's kind of, she's related to the bat. So that's a bat. And it's because she's kind of reclusive. She is kind of shy. So then the bat is like an animal that usually like you don't see them out very much. And it's something that is also related to her character. So some of the outfits are also based on like actual real outfits that exist in the region that I grew up with, so in Paraguay. So like for example, this one, it's almost like a one-for-one copy except for the length of the dress. So this one is based on the Cambacua costume, which is from the Afro-Paraguayan community. And basically they wear this attire when it's like they have a special celebration each year to celebrate like the patron saint that they worship. So because this particular game is centering a lot about like witchcraft and spiritualism, but in like a positive light. So I thought that it would be nice to kind of link these two together to say like, hey, like this community exists and they have like this attire. And of course I had to adapt it to fit within the world. So I couldn't just take that exact outfit and just copy it over to the character, because then like she's the only one wearing like a shorter dress while everyone else is wearing like something that is continuous, like they're all wearing something that covers their feet. So then it would be kind of jarring to see just the one character with something shorter. So then I adapted it so that it's still retaining the color, it's still kind of retaining the original texture, but it fits within the world that I created. So that's like an example of taking something that already exists, but adapting it respectfully into another format that fits what you're trying to create. So, Don't Wake the Night, the way it was built is that I took things I liked, I merged them all together to create a narrative that I felt was unique and that I could express myself through culturally. So it was a chance to kind of bring to light all these things I had been raised up with and kind of merging them together to create something that I will enjoy creating. So it's entirely a fantasy setting with certain aspects about the community being based after Guarani culture, such as everyone having a specific role they play and being named after that role. So everyone has a role. For example, one of the main characters, she's called Guardian because she's in charge of kind of protecting the community. So everyone is named after something that they do, which is follows the some naming conventions in some Guarani nations. They follow it so that it's like, oh yeah, my name is kind of like what you do or what you're known for. And these roles are also very important in those kind of communities because everyone has a role to play depending on like what they do, whether they're a warrior, whether they're a caretaker or a healer. So then that's how it's expressed in this game. But again, it's at first I thought of adding like Spanish names or Guarani names, but then I switched it back to English just to be clear that like this is a fantasy setting. Because then if I made it exactly like how it's in real life, then I would have to start thinking like, is this faithful to actually like what's in real lives, rather than having an adaptation of it in fantasy. But even then, I still have to be careful with it in fantasy. So dealing with games especially, okay, none of the GIFs are playing, that's fine. So when dealing with games especially, animation is also like another great chance to reveal even more about characters. So for example, the way like someone moves can tell you a lot about them, like in terms of like anything that they do, like do they fidget a lot? Do they walk around with like their arms really heavy, like they don't swing them around that much? Do they have like a long stride or a short stride, like depending on like how fast they walk? Do they walk with their chest forward or do they like slump back? Because like usually when someone walks with their chest very open or forward, it's because they have a lot of confidence. And if they slump back, they might not be as open. Another game that was recently released was Pyre. So you can kind of see in the screenshot. Oh, yeah. Oh my god, yes, it works. Okay. So in Pyre, the animation when you're like playing basketball really emphasizes the capacity each character has for movement. So the largest character, Jodariel, moves very slowly, but she has a greater range of attack. The more human character, so the one that's more average sized, it's kind of close to average movement, so he doesn't move like too fast or too slow. Then the dog-sized character is a lot faster, but it's more difficult to control. So this kind of also spells things out about their behavior and their personality. So if you're familiar with the game, Jodariel, who's the biggest character, she's kind of like very standoffish. She can be a bit cold. And then the dog is like more rambunctious. Pyre also has like pretty good world building. So it's a game that like, it's very clearly based in basketball. Like what they're playing is basketball, but like they don't call it basketball, or they never actually like say some basketball words. Like they do use the word dunk, which I find really hilarious, but they don't use like other words that would clearly indicate that this is like basketball. So in the portion, so it's basically like a basketball visual novel. So in the portions that simulate a visual novel, there's highlighted words you can hover over, and then a short description will pop up as additional text. So then that's another way to like insert more text that you can read through in your world, so that in case maybe your player forgets what something is, they can hover over that word, more text pops up. So it's like, so as they're reading, they're never like super confused about like what it is that they're actually going through. So the way that we view worlds is really important in how we create them. And that's really, really hard when we view the world, usually most often by definitions of colonialism. So, and if you're not familiar with like the term colonialism, it's basically, actually I have a quote coming up. Dia Lacina, who wrote a really good article, who's written a bunch of different articles, and they're all great and you should read them all. She wrote an article about Mass Effect Andromeda and how it's kind of expressing very, very overt colonialism in the gameplay. So what she said here in her article was basically defining colonialism is like, colonialism is never about sharing resources or space. The entire concept exists because the imperial need for resources and space is ever expanding. Colonialism is a machine whose only real function is to consume and grow. So if you're familiar with, for example, here in Canada, colonialism continues every day when Indigenous people are taken from their land, their resources are taken, they're deprived of those very resources that they've had for thousands and thousands of years and that they are entitled to. So this article is particularly interesting because games, and you can enjoy it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't enjoy Andromeda. You can enjoy it if it's a good game. I personally will never play it because of the colonialism. But it's fine if you enjoy it. I'm not gonna shame you for that. What the game does and what other games do also when they're open world and where you can kind of explore everything is that it frames colonizing planets and people as a good thing. So, and any hostile races or hostile alien races who are unhappy about what you're doing are framed as villainous, so it's okay for you to kill them. Similarly, in other games, there will be backstory to justify your killing of native populations. So I play a lot of Skyrim. I have a weird attachment to it. I love it. I hate it. I love it. And I think that it dips into interesting places when it comes to race, but it's also very messy. So for example, if you're familiar with the Nord race in Skyrim, they're essentially white nationalists, and you hear plenty about it in the game. In game, that's one of the main story points. And if you'd like, you can side with them, you can join them if you'd like that. But with other races in that game that have suffered through colonialism, so in Skyrim you can meet, if you go underground, there's these really ugly elves that are very deformed, and they are very hostile, and they will attack you if they see you. Formerly they were known as the Snow Elves, but then the Nords colonized them and forced them underground, so now they're all monsters. So they don't have as many options for sympathy for the people who have been colonized, and they have a lot of sympathy for the colonizers. And in this same article, Dia mentions a quote in Andromeda. So when you first wake up, one of the first things that someone tells you about, you gotta go, okay, so you wake up and okay, I gotta go and colonize a bunch of planets. And someone says, could you make it somewhere tropical? And it's beyond me if the writers meant it as a colonialism quote or not, but if you're like me and you grew up in a tropical nation, or if you're just aware of the history of colonialism, so settlers and Great Britain and all the settler countries, they specifically targeted tropical countries to colonize. So between 1850 and 1960, Great Britain actually sat down and categorized nations that fit under a tropical category, so that they went, okay, we want to colonize the tropical nations, we don't want to colonize the other nations, because the tropical ones will be more useful to us. So that quote, even if they didn't mean it, I read that and it's my heart sinks when I read that. So it's you have to be really careful when it comes to even jokingly kind of, oh, you make it somewhere tropical, because it's something that's so deeply embedded in our culture, in the vision of how we view the world, that it's things that are normal to say now actually grew from colonialism. So it's very, very hard sometimes especially if you are a settler and you've never really challenged your view of colonialism, it can be really, really hard to spot. And it's during these kind of situations that it's great to have a sensitivity reader or consult someone, a designer on your team, to make sure that is my writing, or is this character, or is this world, is it very heavily impacted by colonialism? And I think consultation is good. It's good to bring people on to kind of rectify that. But they should also be brought in as designers, because sometimes it's not just through the storytelling, it's not just through the narrative. Sometimes the mechanics themselves can be colonialist, and you might not realize because you see consultants as someone who can only help with the writing, but they can also help with like the design. They can help with like every aspect of what a game is. So like maybe it would have been interesting to see if Andromeda actually challenged colonialism, but it's very hard for a AAA game sometimes to do that. And so with those qualities of colonialism, there's also counters for them. So for example, so things that are easily expressed of colonialism in games is everything is a resource that has to be collected. If it's usually an option and at times acceptable to kill anyone who is not you. Consumption is prioritized over sustainability. Quips that lampshade or reference real-world colonialism. So this is a really silly reference, and like it didn't sink my heart as much as the Andromeda one did. But if you play Splatoon 2, there's a new stage that's called the Manta Maria, which is like a play on words on the Santa Maria ship. And like my only relationship to that is like, oh, the Santa Maria, oh, like one of the ships that Christopher Columbus used to like go to the Caribbean and like kill a bunch of indigenous people. Like that's like the link to that I saw when I saw that. So it's like sometimes even the smallest things can matter a lot. And then another effect of colonialism is exploration is something noble, it's something good, because you need to find a new home, so whatever, who cares? To counter that though, there are counters to those. So for example, not everything is a collectible and items are not resources, so that's like one of the main things that colonialism does is that everything is a resource. So the water is a resource, air is a resource, like everything is a resource and you have to collect it and you have to consume it. But rather than that, items can be precious objects that relate to the land. So like, how does this water relate to the land? How does it relate to me? What does it mean to, you know, all the animals here? Not everything or everyone is out to get you, so like, most likely they are afraid of you. So like if you go, like in Skyrim, for example, whenever I go into a forest, like the wolves will attack me. Like even if I'm like walking away from them, they'll attack me any chance they get, and like the wildlife is just out to kill me. Whereas like maybe they're actually scared of me because like I'm a human and they might think that I'm going to harm them. Or you can actually make it like a positive experience where it's like, oh, like here are some animals, I'm going to try and relate to them. Items are valuable and shouldn't be consumed recklessly, so like in Skyrim, I can just go and like collect 50 bundles of wheat at a time, and then I'm like, cool, and I wait a day and I come back and there's more wheat. So it's like I can just collect wheat forever and it has no value. You can just like keep making wheat. And then something very easy, don't reference colonialist explorers or achievements as good. So anytime I see anything about exploration or pathfinding in games, there's always reference to Christopher Columbus, which is like by this point, like please don't reference Christopher Columbus, don't reference like any explorer really, because they were all like evil people. Exploration can be used to relate to the land rather than take away land from others. So when you're exploring, like why are you exploring because, you know, you want to grab as many things as you want, or are you exploring because it's like I want to get to know this land, I want to relate to it, I want to know why I belong in it. So, which kind of segues into my 1 hour talk about Breath of the Wild. So I think Breath of the Wild, like it's the latest kind of. I very rarely play open world games because they're so time consuming. But Breath of the Wild recently demonstrated a more interesting, or at least to me, an interesting approach to an open world game that doesn't like it still like follows some conventions, but there are some places where it doesn't follow most conventions expressed in open world games that express colonialism. So for example, the game, so you've been asleep for like 100 years or like forever, and you wake up and you don't know anything about like the land has changed because you were asleep. So the game can easily be read as a story of Link familiarizing himself with the land again after being asleep for so long. It prioritizes exploration as a means of gaining knowledge and the place you used to live in, rather than exploration being about consumption and expansion. So in the game, you can visit new places, and there's, you know, achievements that involve, you know, visiting specific spots. And item foraging is still encouraged, and you can definitely like go all out and like collect everything. But it's not something that is like super populous. So like in other open world games, like you can find like resources like and items everywhere. Like I can go in like Skyrim and I can find like 1,000 of the same item like in the same area, and then I just like refresh the game and I come back there and oh my god, there's like 1,000 of the same thing. Who thought? But in Breath of the Wild, it's like it's more like items are more precious and they grow in limited amounts, which makes you want to be more careful with them. So like there was one item I was foraging that was like, I think it was a mushroom, and like they're kind of difficult to find because of the fact that they all grow in the same environment, but they're not just like in huge amounts. And it's also why like you have an item finder on your smartphone or whatever, your Sheikah Slate. And the designers knew that if they make items limited, it'll encourage players to seek them out throughout the world, which is makes that kind of item finding again. You're getting to know the land around you, and you're like, okay, if I go here, then I'll find that, and it kind of teaches you how to be resourceful. This preciousness is also seen in equipment and weapons. So they break easily on how good they are, which means you can't just go killing everything in sight, or at least the game forces you to be really resourceful with your weapons also. I personally was very careful with my bow and arrow because long distance attacks can be good, sneak up on certain enemies, so I didn't want to waste my arrows. And that kind of translates into real life. Like if you're a hunter and you have a bow and arrow and you are out, it's like you have to be resourceful with what you use. And consumption can be shifted over to resourcefulness, and exploration can be changed to knowing the land better. So it's not about like just exploring and like that's it. Another game that does this is also Xenoblade Chronicles. So it's also an open world RPG, and it actually gives you experience points for like exploring and finding new places in the map. And that's actually the easiest way to level up in the game, is just by going around and like seeing new places. And you'll actually level up faster by doing this, as well as helping out any NPCs that need things done for them. So a handful of side quests also involve, doing favors for locals, and you have a relationship chart in the game that, as you become closer to NPCs, it'll unlock new perks. So again, it's like how you relate to people. So this is like in game, that's how the affinity chart looks to like all the NPCs in the world and how you relate to them and how your standing is with them. So again, you're not just like mindlessly like grabbing stuff, you're kind of relating and you're forming a story between everyone. So context is really important. So for example, if this story takes place in the future and there are no racialized people, like what are you trying to say with that? And what about if there's only one racialized person in the entire story? Like, what are you trying to mean by that? Because even if you do a really good job at writing this one racialized character, but they're the only racialized character and everyone else is white, then it kind of sets, like that's your standard. Like that's what you think about racialized people. And even if that's not true, that's kind of what you inevitably set yourself up for. And think about the chance that you're giving this world that you're creating. So think about implications, and remember that no story is perfect, but it's good to avoid factors that make a story unreadable, like referencing settlers or like referencing explorers who were murderers. Like that kind of thing makes stuff unreadable for me. So that's something that also to take care of in games, that it's like, games are really time consuming, and I'm not gonna consume something that disrespects that aspect of me. And again, having a fully fleshed out cast of diverse characters can be really, really challenging because you're spending more time with them to ensure they stand on different ways and that they kind of balance each other out. So rather than thinking about how to represent like every little thing possible, key in on characteristics that will make the character unique and relatable to some extent. So not all characters have to be relatable. They can be appealing. So like, just because you can't relate to a character doesn't necessarily mean that they were badly designed, but they can still be, they can still have an appeal. It can still be like a fully fleshed out character. Let's see. Okay. So that's the end of my section. And to end it off, so the exercise that I have for you, and I'll give you like 10 minutes before we move on to the next section. So keeping in mind everything that I've mentioned about colonialism, about world building, about expressing cues in your characters, try to create a setting that you're going to push a character into. So think of this as like a sandbox or like just a space that you'll be pushing a character in. And think about, so you can pick like a time period, past, present, future. Pick a universe. It can be like just ours. It can be a parallel version, or it can be something made up from the ground up. And then think about how a character could fit in. So don't think about the character yet, but think about the world that you're pushing them into. Yeah? Right? Yeah?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
no, you said you'd give them 10 minutes, right?
Yeah, so you have 10 minutes. If you need any tips or suggestions, we'll be here. I'll walk around and see if anyone needs help. And then we'll go more into a character wardrobe with Leisha after the 10 minutes.
We'll leave the exercise up so they can reference it.
Yeah, yeah.
We should walk around. I don't know any of the colonialism memories, but let's be real.
Go here.
Okay, Noah. I don't even go to school here.
I have a timer, yeah.
Oh, you have another one?
I mean, I just did it over the other one.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that. Alright, that works.
So we started at like 6:40.
Okay, so you went about half an hour?
Yeah.
Okay, so what time? Oh, Jesus. Fine. It's like I'm getting more interested in this than the rest of the talks. So we should just get through the talks and then we can get into the discourse. TM.
Okay, yeah, but I think we need to get
Jeez. I had to shut it down because it was more interesting than what I'm gonna say. You're super duper in the projector. I know yours is much more informative than mine, but please don't harsh my vibe. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Leisha Riddell. Can everyone hear me okay? I know I'm loud, so I just want to make sure. Jesus. I swear a lot too, so who the fuck am I? I'm a veteran game artist. About 7 to 8 years in experience in the industry. I have several ship titles on television, iOS, and web, all for children. Amazingly enough. I'm primarily a visual developer and concept artist, but I also do some work as 3D modeler. I'm also the creator of Project Solace, which is a graphic novel that I co-write with Caitlin Tremblay. Hi. And I have great taste. I mean, let's be real, I'm wearing a shirt that says Weed Limit 69. And strong leg, just the one. Ignore me. So what I'm going to be covering in my section is wardrobes. And I got my opportunity at Marshall's, but the wardrobes that exist in your world tell more about a character than a lot of other aspects. Wardrobe is one of the first things that a lot of people see when they see the first visual representation of your character. Excuse me. So I'm going to hopefully get you on track to being able to style your character. Even if you're not an artist, you can use good old MS Paint and Google Images. And I want to share with you my goals as a character designer and world builder, especially for women and femme characters. And I have a lot of memes, because that's how I fucks with you. So first I want to talk about uniforms, because I know I'm saying wardrobe, and you might say, but my character is a police officer, how can I do that? Or my character is a slutty crossing guard, how can I do that, right? So I want to talk about individuality in a sea of clones. So generally speaking, you don't really spend a lot of time on extras in any media, like video games, movies, television. I remember we made extras for a TV show that I was working on, and we literally used hue saturation until we had 8 extras. On their clothes. But if you want to say, like, for the example in the slide in Metal Gear Solid 5, even if they're wearing the same thing, they all sort of wear it differently, right? Like if Gabby and I were wearing the same thing, we would still wear it differently. And that way you break it up so it's not a sea of clones or a sea of NPCs from Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. Because each person, even if they're an extra, has their own quirks. So find ways to create individuality, even if your world demands uniformity. And why is the next slide blank? Oh, no, I got it. Okay, cool. I was like, what is happening? This is the first time I've used an iPad for this, so. Okay, so finding ways to create individuality, even if your world demands uniformity. So I'm gonna use nursing as an example. And if your story, for instance, takes place in a modern day hospital, you don't want like Jackie 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Like you don't want that, right? Especially if you're like drawing it in the background, or you just take your asset and you go copy, paste, 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 paste. We've all done that, right? And it just kind of, it feels clunky. So like what I was saying before, like characters will wear same or similar things differently. This was just on Google Images. People will wear things differently, so people will choose different styles within the parameters given to them, even if the clothes aren't supplied, which in the case of a lot of uniforms, they are. I wrote these notes, and then I wasn't reading them, and I'm like, this is hard. Sorry. So, like, for instance, like, Someone will wear it one way, and then someone will wear it looser or baggier, and someone will wear it shorter, like shorter pants, or like really hiked up, and someone will wear it longer, and someone will cinch it first, and someone will wear the wrong color. But really, like, that happens in uniforms, and like that way you can create that sort of like, oh, these are a bunch of different people instead of copy and paste. But like, once you pick a theme for your world and for the wardrobe arguing across the world, you can't like be like, well, this person in the background is an individual because, oh, it didn't play.
Oh no.
Oh, here we go.
How loud is it?
I don't know, let's find out. Anyway, well, you know what it is. Everyone knows the toy duck screaming. So I apologize for this literally 100 pixel image, but I want to talk about uniforms and ensembles. And I know Gabby had a 1-hour talk about Breath of the Wild already. And I have some bones to pick with Breath of the Wild. I think everyone does. Sorry, I'm literally ADDing all over my own slides. Give me a minute. In the beginning of the game, we established that the blue color, like the brilliant blue turquoise, is the color for the Royal Guard, or the champions. I'm sorry if this is spoilers, but it's been out for a while. Do I find it particularly lazy that they just slapped it on the champions in the game? Yes. Do I think they should all be wearing Link's tunic? No, because it wouldn't work. You can't put a shirt on all of them and expect it to look good, right? Especially considering all of the different races in Hyrule wear their clothes very differently. Or no clothes in the case of Daruk, who just has hair in absence of clothes and straps. I think this was the best solution they could come up with, given the rules they established about each of the races. But it does make me clench my jaw every time I see it. Yeah, so since the video is not going to play, I'm just going to skip it. So personal examples. I'm going to talk about Project Solace for a second. Project Solace takes place in an alternate reality, present-day Toronto. And a lot of the wardrobes that I chose for the characters are occupationally based, such as security officers or engineers or doctors. And I personally aim to keep things practical, because we have to interrupt our scheduled programming to talk about some media fuck-ups in uniforms and work clothes, because what the fuck is happening? I'm sure we could have the discourse about this all day, but I have so much to say about that, and it really just makes me feel like this. Like, I had an interesting thought. Actually, fuck this. But really, like, the most successful characters will have a recurring theme to their clothing, even if it's completely different outfits. So 2 successful characters I found were Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones, which I know is not games or comics, but it is media, and of course Princess Zelda, which gets me very excited. I like to talk about both of them. And the obvious reason why I like these is that they're both women doing field work. So their clothes are practical. They are not a thong with some fishnets over it, which, if there was a good reason behind it, I would accept it, but I don't think there is. Now I know about as much of Game of Thrones as I know about particle physics, but I do know that it has the budget of the Vatican, so I expect their wardrobe to be on point, and it is. So if I were to break down Brienne into 3 words, it would be strong, stoic, and simple. And I don't mean simple in a bad way, but I do realize that in all of the outfits that we can assume Brienne chooses for herself, they don't have much flash to them. Even her flashiest outfit when she was serving King, it's still pretty modest. Even when she's an appointed King's Guard, she keeps things simple, and even in her simple dress without any armor, all it has is the house that she's serving and no other embellishments. Now, I'm sorry, I'm not going to spoil too much because honestly I don't remember. I probably did it in a fever dream, the ending of Breath of the Wild. But I really have to commend the art director's work on Zelda specifically. I find her wardrobe to be a wild success because of the whole idea of using the turquoise to represent the royal family, but I also noticed an arcing theme of white being very important. And I'm not like talking about off-white, which is present in a lot of the other outfits. Like Link has a lot of off-white, and a lot of the champions have a lot of off-white, but Zelda is often clothed in pure white. Like the sort of white that blooms in daylighting. So like, I assume that the brilliant blue was chosen because it stands out against a sort of muted, desaturated landscape that sort of feels like a very Studio Ghibli watercolor background. But like, all of Zelda's clothes and her whole wardrobe in Breath of the Wild speak to the practicality of her character, especially when she's running around in pants, which I was like, yes, why can't I play as Zelda? And even her ceremonial dress, the one that she's up on the freezing mountain with, like, it's not like a really flashy dress. It's obviously a dress with a specific use in mind. And now we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. So, how do I dress my character? Again, I'm going to go back to specific examples for me. I'm going to talk about Project Solace. So, like, the protagonist is Alex Wolff. They're a 20 to 23-year-old student, and they live in Toronto. Boiling it down to the basics, I take the basic understanding of the character. So in this case, it's a young 20s, non-binary person from Toronto who has some money to spend on clothes, which is unlike all of us when we were in our early 20s, because God knows I had negative $10,000. So when I think about what clothes they might be wearing, I brainstorm, okay, so what do I know so far? The three, like I did with Brienne, I did 3 words: rich, androgynous, and they're an artist. So I go on down to good old Google, and I choose things that resonate with me and hopefully resonate with other people who understand the reality that I'm trying to weave here. Like, everyone in Toronto wears fucking Converse at one point. And because they have some money to spend, I was okay with searching up stuff like Fashion Week Toronto, or cool hipster fashion, and not really being limited to a specific, like, inexpensive budget wardrobe. But if I was gonna do that, I would look at stuff from thrift stores or stuff from like cheaper stores, which is totally fine. So after I would do the brainstorming, and obviously I would have more images than the 8 that I have up there, I started to develop the beginnings of a wardrobe for Alex. And if you don't know Project Solace, they're fairly limited by the fact that they have to sort of wear a uniform while they're there. But I was able to create like workout clothes, basic everyday with a hoodie, streetwear, and streetwear with a leather jacket. So I took care to understand what the character in the backstory that I've written would want to accentuate about their body. So Alex is sort of self-conscious about their torso, so they would obviously wear a huge hoodie to hide behind that. Where they might wear baggier clothes, where they might wear tighter clothes, stuff like that when you're designing your character. And you really don't need to draw to be able to decide these things. Because you want to consider your character's wants and needs out of their wardrobe when you're writing them or drawing them. Because you don't want to end up with something like this, where the character feels like really awkward and clunky and like they don't want to be there. And I wish the video would play, but I know it's not going to, so I'm just going to move ahead. So I did the same thing for another character, and this is where it sort of gets a bit more complicated. And I couldn't find a neutral pose of Lisa because I didn't do her wardrobe yet. But I didn't want to fuck this up because I'm not Indian, and I don't necessarily know much more about Indian heritage and Indian culture than I do from interviews or Google. But I do understand that Lisa's connected to her Indian heritage, and I do understand that they're a security officer and past law enforcement. So they want to be seen as professional in their day job, but they also have heritage-heavy clothing for special occasions. So I always find it handy to create custom palettes for each character, and it helps separate out individuals. So in this case, I do try to color code the core four, as I call them. You'll always see Crystal in warm clothes, and you'll always see Alex wearing blues, and you'll always see Kyoko wearing pinks, and you'll usually see Lisa wearing grayscale or at least very desaturated blue. And successful ensemble casts will be dressed, and that doesn't make any sense. Will be dressed, and you'll be able to see the individuality, even if, like, at an initial glance, they may not feel that individual. And I'll show you an example. Like, we all have bones to pick with each of the games that I'm showing here right now. And you could say, but Leisha, how can you tell the boys apart? They're all wearing black. And you know who I mean when I say the boys. But I actually find it very interesting because even though it's a 300 by 200 pixel JPEG, I can tell you that they're different shades of gray, and they're different levels of warmth or coolness. And the accessories and the shapes of the dark gray on their bodies give off a different silhouette. So like, you'll see more arms or less arms or more chest, right? Or they'll have white accents on their clothes, so you know who's who at a glance, even though they're all wearing black. And one of my favorite examples is actually Mass Effect, regardless of other problems we may have with the game, are the lines that they use to represent the characters, lines in their wardrobe. So you'll always recognize the Krogans because of the circle around their head going down their chest, or the Asari tend to have clothes that make them look taller. And Garrus will always have things that make his shoulders look broader. Don't blame me, it was Kate. That sort of thing I want everyone to think about when they're creating their cast of characters and slapping some clothes on them. Because like, I actually thought of this on the way here and I didn't have any way to add it in. If you have to, honestly, a t-shirt and shorts is a pretty good way to go. Like, as generic as it seems, it's really not offensive to anyone. And like, as long as they're different t-shirt and shorts, it's a pretty good way to go to start off until you get to sort of different lines to accentuate your characters in really complex armor like Mass Effect. So my exercise is take a character, one you've created, and describe them using 3 to 5 words like I did with Brienne and Alex, and Google some clothes with your phone or your laptop if you have one, and put them together or just save the images, and then show mommy, which is me. And then we can do that at the end, because you should talk now.
I will talk
After?
We might take about 5 minutes to figure out the sound.
Okay. Yeah, okay, cool. We're gonna take 5 minutes to figure out sound.
The sound, because it's connected here.
Theoretically, anyways.
I'm gonna break it, so
like 7 buttons and got sound working. Wait, is the sound turned up on the iPad?
Yeah. Oh, weird.
Hold on.
Yeah. Oh, maybe no.
Where's this?
That's weird. Is it because?
Oh wait.
Is it
Oh,
mute? No.
off.
Because technically, if I press here, this should move the. But it's not. I wonder if it's because it's connected to the HDMI. So then. Because it won't show the volume going up and down. Or maybe no. It won't show the volume going up or down. So.
I think on the iPad you could customize it that the button does different things.
Yeah, it might be in your. I don't know how iPads work. Are they like Macs?
Huh?
I don't know how iPads work. Are they like Macs?
They
Yeah,
are,
yeah,
yeah.
basically. Yes.
Because I know sometimes you'll have to go into like your settings and then select iPads.
Yeah, because.
Yeah, you want to just unplug it from the.
Yeah.
Pull it out. So going through your.
Yeah.
Go here, go settings. Oh, it's completely off.
We can sit down now.
Okay, I guess I could start now. I'm Royale. Everyone calls me Rakashi. You could use either or. Um, I really like Sonic the Hedgehog, if you couldn't tell already. I design games, I write games. I come from a writing background, so I graduated from Humber College for journalism, and then I sort of kind of just like wiggled my way into narrative writing for video games because I met Henry, and then Henry always just keeps talking, and then I just end up doing stuff that I've never done before, and then that's why I'm here. So I make a lot of narrative games. I don't post them, but I just like tinkering around with like, you know, stories and like how they work, characters, how they work, and like the conjunction of the two, and how like, I don't know, it just makes it really interesting to see how I can make characters and put them in a situation and see how they react to everything around them with other people, or how they react to themselves, which is really interesting. A lot of people never talk about that, how characters react to themselves, so that's a thing that should be in games. So what you gonna learn? How to not make shitty characters that look like me, so like a person of color, a black dude. My experience creating an everyday person, you know, like people, you know, just see like, you know, when you walk down the street, you just see like a whole bunch of different people, you know, like they all have their own experiences, and you have to like respect that. And how would you translate that into video games, which is also really interesting. And maybe I'll rant because I have nothing better to do. This is me. I'm running. I just wanted to include that. So one of the first things I want to talk about is making your character vulnerable. As I was saying before, when you have a character, how they react to themselves, that's another way of, you know, creating a character that has depth, where, you know, they're afraid of themselves. So it could, you know, at least in my field, a lot of my games, actually all my games, focus on mental health. So when I design a game and I want to, you know, make them vulnerable, I kind of just look in the mirror and then, you know, just make a game based on myself, which is weird to say, especially in front of like a lot of people, but that's how it works, and it's easier for me because it's not only is it valuable, but it's true, so a lot of people can relate to that also. So one example I have for, you know, creating a character that's like vulnerable, a lot of people are very, I guess, which character? A lot of people know the character Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. So when you play Final Fantasy VII, you realize that Cloud is like super depressed. He's like not very like energetic, and it's really interesting because when you go back and play Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, he's nothing like that. He's very active. He's talkative. He's very open, and I feel like it's always very important to have a character who, you know, has both. So I guess I could do that first. So I'm gonna like play a small clip. Hopefully my computer is loud enough, since sound isn't working there. So sorry for everyone who's watching online.
Yo! Don't fall too far behind. At least someone's keeping up. Well, I'm a country boy too. From where? Nibelheim. Me? Gungaga.
I guess I should press play at the same time.
What's so funny about that? You know Gungaga? No, but it's such a backwater name. You know Nibelheim. Like you've been there. I haven't. But there's a reactor there, right? A Mako reactor outside Midgar usually means nothing else out there. song. Me and Cloud here are both backwater experts. Oh yeah. Good. Carry on then.
So that's just like one example of having, you know, like them expanding on the backstory of a character who a lot of people were like, oh well, he's so like he's a hero, but he's also very boring. He doesn't talk. He doesn't interact with people. And I did a little bit of research, and they didn't really talk about it, but I could only imagine them going back and being like, okay, well, we have this hero that everyone loves, and he's like super depressed. Why does he only, you know, have that one side? Why can't he have, you know, a playful side that, you know, characters can relate to? I mean, yes, we get sad all the time, but we also have like good moments, so that it's really good to have a character that has a balance of both. So I feel like that really works in video games, especially when you have characters that meet other characters. And by the way, that was Zach with like spiky black hair. And in my game, I'm Fine, which is a narrative game, choose your own adventure narrative game. You play as a person who is depressed and he's trying to find himself through, you know, sexuality, who he is as a person, and he's having a very hard time, you know, getting past, you know, the barriers of himself. So that's why he tries to confide in his friends, and it's really interesting how you have to figure out how, you know, someone of that mindset would actually interact with another person who doesn't suffer from mental health. So there are a few points in my game where the characters will clash because they can't understand empathy, and it's really interesting because like when I was writing it, it's one of those things where you know, I'd just be writing like character dialogue, and all of a sudden I just look back at what I read. I'm like, and you could just see how realistic it is. So someone could be like trying to say to their best friend, like, hey, this is a thing that I suffer from, and that person who cannot empathize with those actions, they will be like, well, you know, why don't you just like relax? And it's like, well, first of all, you don't fucking tell someone with mental health to relax. It's not that easy. But besides that, I chose different variations to how that character can react depending on how the player chooses. So every time so the whole game as a choose your own adventure, you're given many options as you read through the story. And every time you can choose how you want your character to react in a certain situation. And all the other characters you're interacting with will react to that reaction. There we go. So it's like a whole branching narrative that I feel like is very important to creating a character that has you know, some depth rather than being, you know, 2D and boring and doesn't seem like they'd be a real person in life. So one of the things that I always yell at people at is when they fail to do something so simple. It's like, yeah, you're sitting at your computer or you're on your phone most of the time, so, you know, do your goddamn research. Fuck's sake. A lot of the time I see people create these fake characters that are supposed to be, you know, very inspirational when they don't really suit the purpose of. What's a good way to say this? But they just don't suit the purpose correctly, so it doesn't connect. So I feel like if you're going to create something, especially if you're going to create a character of color, it's always good to do consultation. If you don't know, please find someone who does. A lot of times I'll be on panels at like PAX or GamerX, and as soon as we open it up for comments, I'm just saying this now just in case people ask me, people will be like, well, as a creator who's not of color, how do I find people, who are not like me to ask? And I just tell them to sit down, honestly, because they could just look around them and see a whole sea of people who are different from them and have many experiences that they could ask just as well as just asking me, because it's going to be, I'm going to give them one side and there's like 50 other people who could give them various different experiences. So don't waste people's time by asking them how you can find these people if you're not willing to, look outside and see everyone around you. Another thing is when you're creating, especially characters of color, please don't use caricatures. The other day I was watching Ghost in the Shell, which is not that one, the animated version, and this scene popped up, and so these two are cyborgs, but the way how they're illustrated is very caricature. Mad. I was like so pissed because a lot of people came in defense of it, trying to tell me that like in Japan, like this is just how they see black folks, and I was like, well, I'm not gonna handle that bullshit. There's no fucking way, because as far as I know, people in Japan have internet, and I'm pretty sure even though they are a minority, you can find black folks in Japan. If I could find black folks in Japan, everyone from this animation studio should be able to find black folks in Japan. I'm pretty sure they would all tell them that this is not okay. Like, no black character looks like that. I know they're a cyborg, but nobody looks like that, and it's really unfortunate that that is the route that they chose for this purpose. Another thing is you have to allow your character to be taken seriously. It's fine to have like a joke character, a character that just is very silly. It doesn't really do anything, but also those joke characters, especially if you're going to make them a person of color, it has to be in a way that's respectful. So, for example, I have someone from Uncharted, Nadine Ross, which I find that she is a very I don't know, it's really interesting because she's very strong black woman that is not taken seriously, but even though that is Nathan Drake's whole I guess personality, that he can't really take anything seriously. But this is a really good example of taking a character and giving her power, giving her, first of all, I guess proper black hair in video games. That's also a plus because no one ever seems to care about that either. But I'm just going to play a quick video of Nadine meeting Drake for the first time, and then a quick video of Drake meeting Nadine almost at the end of the game, so sort of spoilers, but this game has been out for forever, so give me one moment. I'll try to play these simultaneously so people at home can watch it also.
I'll tell you what, I won't tell anyone if you don't.
You have something I want, and you're going to give it to me.
Really? Well, I'm flattered. I'm afraid I'm spoken for. You'll excuse me.
I'm not in the mood for games. Give me the crucifix.
You're lucky I'm a gentleman. As if I were.
there's a little delay, but
Just remember, I don't want to do this.
Let's see what you Next. Nice try.
I gave you that one.
Hand me the artifact.
You know how many artifacts I've collected over the years? You're gonna need to be more specific.
Let me see if I can clarify.
I guess for time's sake, I guess you get the idea that even though that Nadine is not the main character of the game, she still plays a very powerful role. So it's really interesting to see how Naughty Dog has taken these steps to create a character of color that also is very strong, like very vocal, very determined, and even though she's a bad person in a sense, still have her, still having the respect that she deserves as a character, which I feel like a lot of times they never seem to do that. I guess we could play the second one. I think I could skip the second one. Could try to skip it. So yeah, my talk is very short, but it's also very blunt. A lot of the times you have to have your characters who are of color taken seriously in games. A lot of times people will be like, oh, well, you know, it's just a game. Why does it matter? Well, it matters to us. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean, you know, everyone feels the same. A lot of these people play these games and they will dissect it for what it is. And once you see that, you know, that the characters have all had the time put into, you know, their facial expressions, their dialogue, their looks, it's pretty powerful, especially to a creator like myself. So, I mean, when I first started playing Uncharted, I already knew about Nadine because I've seen her in trailers, and the whole backlash because she was voiced by a white lady. But as a character and her narrative, it's actually jumped out to me because it was very something. It was something that I never really see in video games because a lot of times you'd never see a character like her growing up in. For me, especially because I came from the Caribbean, so when I came to Canada and you know, I'm just seeing all these games with like white faces, there was no one for me to relate to. So I thought it was really interesting, especially since this game is very new, that it's still something that AAA developers, something that AAA developers still need to work on to get perfect. There's the underlying, personally for me, I think the underlying issues are they're not being taken seriously, their looks aren't being taken seriously, and I feel like their personality is very overlooked and kind of like flops for me if it doesn't like pop out and be like, this is a character that, you know, doesn't, I guess in a sense, very interesting, I guess. I guess at the basics, if it's not a very interesting character that you want to get to know, then it kind of like falls flat. And allow your characters to collect Chaos Emeralds. So for my exercise, I want you to create a character with a real personality. So, like, a character could have, you know, a lot of the times you you have a character that, or I guess in this case, when you're playing a game, there's not a lot of characters that have a certain kind of disability. So I would encourage you to create a character with a real personality. You could try giving a character that isn't represented in games, so a character that could have a certain kind of disability. I wouldn't call disability a flaw, but you could give them a different flaw, which works for the terminology, but also give them a strength to balance it out. So, for example, you could give them maybe the character uh, is very depressed, and the strength to balance it out is that they're very outgoing when, I guess, when a certain topic pops up, they're very outgoing. So that's a good way to balance it out and show Papa Haga when you're done. So I guess since that's the last talk, I mean, yeah, there's time to work on it, but I'll leave this up since it's the last one, so you guys can get a good whatever, so you know what to do. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, because one more. Okay.
Um, so we're gonna give you like 10, 15 minutes to add more to what you have. And again, we're here to give you any feedback or any tips. After about 15 minutes, we're gonna just come up here and we'll be open for like Q&A or any kind of topic that you want us to go over that maybe you felt we didn't pay as much attention to, and we'll briefly go over it. And if you do have like any questions or topics to suggest, just come up here. Once the 15 minutes is up, we'll let you know. You have to say them into the mic just for the live stream, so then we'll take it from there. Or we can repeat it back. Yeah.
just takes a couple. Okay.
I don't know, I was like a changeling, like they swapped me out at birth.
Well, I mean, my mom would yell at me before me if I was doing something that she knew that I wanted. She was like a little lady, very childish. You know, that's very strong on the slash. Plus 10 control and manipulation. Very, very angry stuff.
Yep.
Very angry, very strong stuff.
Testing. Hello. Is anyone out there?
There's just a problem with audio on the stream, so I was trying to fix it. I need to have that experience.
Did you just use YouTube for streaming or? Go for it.
I think it's YouTube. No, it's YouTube because Sophie has it first.
Yeah, it was YouTube and Sophie was checking out.
So just compare it doesn't go from back. Just from the stream.
Oh, okay.
Screen shaver. Screen saver.
Oh, yeah.
Screen shaver. I'm like in the crisis. I don't know how long I'm gonna wait. Oh my goodness. Oh my god.
Well, I got
So tragic right now. Oh my goodness.
what? No.
Stop, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, people of the internet. I didn't know it would go back so quick. It's gonna go back. I was sitting so far away. You weren't talking to me. Kate, don't yell at me.
Yeah, I guess there's a setting to like put it so it never goes to sleep, right?
Yeah. That's in settings. We don't have to do that. It's fine. When is our question round? It's so funny. I was supposed to go watch it tonight.
Oh god. It's supposed to have really good reviews though, like
Yeah.
at least better than the original.
Yeah, me and Ed are gonna go watch it on
I mean it's
Saturday.
clown actually. It's in the old one and the new one. You also
But
can't hurt.
yeah, it was weird because like the colors were very like vibrant. I'm like they weren't like dirty. You know, like when I see a clown, I see like vibrant colors. I'm like, first of all, like get the fuck away from me.
Yeah.
But like I don't know, like the costume design was pretty on point this time. So
I read the plot for it and I'm like, whoa, this is way different than what I expected.
yeah, a friend of mine read the book.
Just about the genre. I'm like, no, it's not.
So much more. It's messed up. Oh my god. Is this a full-time job?
He just doesn't want me to yell at him.
Yes, Mom? What, 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
You
Just turn the table and be like, okay, just kidding, it's not a workshop, it's a fight club.
Excuse me, the microphone is still on.
Speak up. We want it captured on the and the recording.
I like that I call you Mom, even though I am older than you.
Yes, like if you just no.
I mean, I'm like Back to the Future, like,
I never liked Back to the Future. The movie was creepy. Back to the Future. I like the jackets and those cool shoes, but that's about it.
no, I'm not talking about any of that.
Alicia, you're part of this workshop. Alicia, where did you go? I was so worried. Look at your face. You're like, why?
Are you yelling at me?
No.
You're not my real dad. No one is. I'm adopted. What's up the wasteland?
I need to be able to see.
Hi, we're just going to take some time to allow you to ask us any questions you may have, or if there's like one particular topic you want us to like talk about for a little bit. So we have like about 30 minutes left. So we'll take as many questions as we can, and if there's a topic suggested, and I'll repeat the questions or topics back into the mic so that the stream can also hear it.
No, I was saying thank you.
That's not a question.
Anyone? Oh yeah.
As for the last speaker, you mentioned Uncharted 4
Mhm.
as an example of a great character of color. I was wondering, do you have other examples in recent years, or?
So I'll just repeat the question again. So the question was for Riel about, in reference to the Uncharted 4 character, if there's any other characters of color that are more recent that are interesting.
No, honestly, unfortunately, there's not a lot that jump out to me and scream that um, that they're different, they're not out there, they don't seem dedicated to what they're doing in game. And if I'm playing a game and I feel like uh, a lot of like characters of color aren't dedicated to their goals in game, then I lose interest, and that's really unfortunate. So yeah, no, but I do like, obviously I do hope that a lot of studios will put more time and effort into creating these diverse characters and see how that grows, because I see a lot of especially like in Mass Effect, not Andromeda per se, but I haven't played Andromeda, but like 3, I really like how diverse it is, even though they're aliens. So if there was a way to take that sort of diversity and put it in, humanized roles of like different people of color, I feel like that would be very, very successful. And it's really awkward to see how that hasn't necessarily been done right. And yeah, that's how I feel about it personally.
Do you mind if me and Alicia weigh in on like what
Yeah, yeah, sure.
interesting? Do you have any interesting characters of color? Or
No, I'm thinking, honestly. I was trying to. I'm a bit of a slow thinker, so I was like,
like you're rebooting, like.
no, I can't honestly think of a single character of color that has resonated with me. Hopefully the mic can hear that.
So recently, yeah, I feel similarly. Recently, though, there was one game that came out. It's not like, it's published by Pillow Fight Games. It's called Ghosts of Miami. So it's a visual novel story, takes place in Miami. So it centers a lot of like Latino characters, especially like during like the AIDS crisis. So it also involves a lot of queer characters. So I think that's a really neat game. I haven't played it myself yet, but I've seen a lot about it. I know some of the people that made it. So that's a really cool game. And it only just recently came out. So it's like that's something that is like maybe the first time I've ever seen like both a game and a visual novel that is actually like featuring Latino characters in like in a very like complex setting. Like that's like the AIDS crisis in Miami is like super complex. Like there's a lot of things that can go in that story. In terms of like other characters of color, even though no, I can't think of anything.
I feel like the fact that we have to like really strain to.
It's because there are characters of color, but I have problems with most of them. So like for example, in Breath of the Wild, there's the Gerudo, which are like all the women of color, but it's still like not perfect. Like there's definitely like flaws in there, and also like one of the main Gerudo characters is voiced by a white woman, so it's like there's this strand of like women of color being voiced by white women is like it being like kind of like an acceptable thing, that it's like, oh yeah, like voice doesn't matter, when voice matters a lot actually, because it's like people of color don't get as many voice acting roles, and the fact that there's people of color voiced by white people, it means that those roles are being taken away from them. So like that's another issue. I know that like Tekken has a lot of people of color in it. I feel like everyone is represented in Tekken. Like if you can imagine a human being of anything, like they are probably in Tekken. Like I really like. Whoops! Oh no!
God. No, leave it on that. Leave it on that.
Okay, that's the last slide. Like in Tekken, like King really speaks to me because I'm from South America, and when I see a jaguar, I'm like, yes, that's my thing. And so when I see this man with like a jaguar head, I'm like, that really speaks to me. Yeah, and like definitely like fighting games tend to have the most representation when it comes to people of color, and it's also interesting to see like the fact when you go to like events like Evo or like fighting tournaments, to match to the game, there's also actually a lot of players that are people of color in those events. So you can kind of see like, well, there's probably a correlation with that. Like fighting games have more people of color represented, and also more people of color like show up at these events. And it's interesting to think about that, and why that is. Yeah. Are there any other
Can I
questions?
bust in here for a second?
Okay.
I thought of something.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm a slow thinker. It's not a game, but you mentioned voice acting and like white
Yeah.
women taking like quote unquote people of color roles, and now I know that like oh god, there's so much of the discourse on Steven Universe, but I'm so happy on a personal level that there's like Asian and Filipino actresses voicing like the main three gems. Like, thank you. That's all.
And there's also a bunch of upcoming games that look promising. Like there's like the Beyond Good and Evil sequel coming out that features a black woman, and like that looks
With really nice hair.
with really nice hair. So like that looks like it could be good. Like I look forward to that. Same with like I don't know if it's out yet, but there was like the Dishonored extra DLC or something or the other that featured a black woman as well. And then there was like the new Wolfenstein, I believe, also features a black woman character. And if you, Gita Jackson from Kotaku actually did an article after E3 featuring like talking about black hair and like talking about all the new black characters that were featured in some of the E3 like previews, and which is really nice, like a nice roundup of like the different black characters that were featured. So it's definitely, I can definitely see that like compared to last year's E3, there's, I mean, definitely not as many white characters, but there's definitely a lot more like black characters being featured at E3 and like flagship games or like as like title roles. So that's nice to see. It's like a slow, gradual, but it's like nice to see. Do you anything else? Okay, so we can take more questions if anyone has any.
Yep. You have one.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is going to make much sense because it's kind of theoretical and my coffee's wearing off and I'm also melting right now. But let me know, like, just give me like blank faces if this just doesn't make sense. You guys have been talking a lot about sort of creating self-contained characters, and what I'm sort of hoping to bounce off you guys is the kind of questions you get with a protagonist who is culturally different from the player, but the way that players tend to project into the protagonist in an interactive medium. And so I was wondering that the first talk you were talking about subtext and queuing and ritual
Oh, no.
skills. And so I was wondering if there was any spitballing on how to sort of create the frameworks of cues that tell you, even if the protagonist lives in a completely different set of priorities from the player, how do they cue to make choices that are authentic to the protagonist? Does that make any sense?
So the way I understood is basically how to bridge the gap when the protagonist is, or the player themselves is like very different from the from the protagonist that they're playing and the people that they're interacting with. Is that sort of?
It's basically how do you use that to dodge the effect where you've got a protagonist who is of a diverse or intersectional identity, but because the player may not be, you're basically just whitewashing the character.
Yeah.
It's getting whitewashed.
Right. Yeah. So, for example, like the game I'm developing right now, I'm gonna see if I can. Oh,
Scroll.
I wanna go back. Okay. If I can.
There she goes.
Yeah.
Oh god, you killed them.
Okay, we're there. So my game, that's something that I not struggle, but it's something that I think about a lot because of the fact that the culture that I'm focusing on or basing the in-game culture on is a culture that like not a lot of people are going to be familiar with. Like not a lot of people to begin with know where Paraguay is or what it is. Not a lot of people are just naturally going to know about Guarani people. Not a lot of people are going to know about Afro-Paraguayan people and about their rights and their culture. So what I did is it's something I made a culture for them that it's like when I read it, it reads authentic to me. So it helps that I'm from also that similar culture, so then I can kind of identify like what stands out. But if other people read it, they can still understand that it's a culture that exists, like in terms of like it existing within a fantasy world. For example, and there are definitely some things in the game that like people will not get. Like that's something that I'm expecting. I'm not expecting for people to look at her dress and be like, oh, that's the Kamakwa outfit. Like no one will say that unless they're from the same place I'm from. And that's okay with me because as long as it's something that's authentic with me, then I don't mind other people like not being able to identify it. So when I create this game and create the characters, my priority is to make it authentic to the people that matter. So I'm making it authentic for people that this will ring true with. So for example, when someone back home looks at this and goes, oh, it's the Kamako outfit, I'm like, that's it. That's like all I need. A white person looking at this and not understanding where it comes from, that's not my priority. It's not like my priority for them to fully understand like the cultural context of this in terms of like understanding like what it means to me and what it means to people that share this culture. So something that I reference a lot. So an album, so music plays a big role in how I create things because I think the way musicians come up with music and songs, it's very, like the process is very inspiring. And I love to listen to Solange's Seat at the Table. And like any interview you read with her and how she created the album, and a lot of it is like that authenticity that it's like, I don't want it to matter to everyone. I want it to matter to the people that this will affect the most. I want it to matter to me. I want it to matter to my family. So it's kind of like a thing. So this is something, it relates a lot to like ancestry. It relates a lot to like cultural practices. And I think that when you, and also thinking about relating to the character, like growing up, like all of us, like people of color, we've only really ever played as white people. So, then again, the question comes up that it's like, if we can play games with white people as the protagonists and like be mostly cool with it, then I'm sure that you can have like a person of color protagonist and you're a white person and you play with them, it's fine, it's cool. And then, yeah, like the cultural stuff, it can be tricky if like they understand it or not, but I think it's important to just prioritize like who is gonna get this, like who am I, like who's my target audience, who do I want to understand, like which kind of audience do I want to them to understand this type of thing. So for example, my game, my target audience is honestly like people of color who have not seen themselves in games. And that's like the feedback for me that matters the most at this point. And yeah, do you have anything?
Just to add on to that, I just want to say that in terms of playing games with characters that are, I guess, in a sense, not in your world, there is power in education. So, for example, me playing Gabby's game and not understanding everything about her culture will educate me to to at least maybe not educate like other people on my behalf, but be like, hey, there's someone who could tell a story better than I can, and it'll be a way for you for the player to have a better understanding of your world, which is also really good because some people want to learn, and if they want to learn, you should give them an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I was just thinking, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I also feel like you're asking if your worried if, say, someone who isn't of like a diverse and intersectional background can empathize with that sort of protagonist? And like, no? Okay, cool. No, because I was thinking about that, but I think that something written with authenticity, like you were saying, will always sort of override the perceived like player's own narrative. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Like I'm doing the same thing with my comic, which is not a game at all, because I'm making people have the narrative the way I want them to have it. But it is for the people who I think it'll affect the most, more than other randos. So.
I wanted to dish on the South Park skin color thing.
No.
Oh
No,
my.
let us not. Let us not. No, it's too fresh. Don't open that newly stitched up wound
It
yet.
is really. I think we should mention it. So
Okay.
earlier today, thing that really irks me was that South Park's new game, The Fractured Butthole, they came out with, well, they announced a new feature of the game
Yeah.
where your skin color will determine the
How hard,
difficulty
yeah.
in the game. So if you want the game to be easy, you play as a white character, and it has like a slider. So if you go to like the darkest skin tone, that's extremely hard. And I'm still trying to process
Yeah,
it from reading it
it's-
this morning. I don't know. It's really.
It's like, so I was, I'm like, I don't like that type of humor. I don't like South Park. I don't get it. But I was reading a really interesting, like, I read really interesting, like, tweets on it on Twitter. And, there were a couple people that said it's kind of like a, like, drive-by humor, that it's like, it hits you in the face, doesn't have anything else to say, really. Because it could be like, oh, like a deep commentary on like what that means, but it's not. It's South Park. Like they're not gonna go much deeper than like a shallow joke. So like again, like is that shallow joke worth is it worth making a joke out of the people that will affect the most? And the answer is no. So
Nope.
oh, yeah, nope. So that's like, and again, like that's another example where it's like and I don't know who the team behind that game was, or like if they have any people of color on their team, but I can guarantee that if you have like more people of color in your team, that those things can be prevented, or if you like,
But with like.
yeah,
But I mean, with those people who make South Park,
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised,
yeah,
but I was just like, of course
Yeah.
they would. But I don't know. It's interesting to, and a lot of people got mad at me for saying that it's interesting, but it is, in a sense, interesting to see how
It's like
that they
had
were
to be-
allowed to do that and just be like,
Yeah.
whatever, this is a thing. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, it's a thing that I also, as a independent creator, thought about doing in my games, but not telling the player, and being like, yes, the game is very difficult because you're playing as a character of color who has it worse than others, but to have something just like right in your face, I'm just like, well, holy shit, well, that's a thing that's happening, and it affects like all matters of the gameplay, so you earn less money, I believe.
It doesn't affect combat.
It doesn't affect combat, but you
But
earn less
everything
money, and everything else outside of combat, it affects you in a negative way, just because you chose a darker skin color, and I'm not sure if I want to play that.
yeah. No, it like if choosing to be darker sets like if the game sets it up so that when you choose to be darker, it has a list of things that you'll be punished for, then it's like that. Like again, like how in the mechanics, like that things like that don't just express themselves narratively; they are also expressed like in the mechanics themselves. Like that's what message you're sending to the player. Like this is what we think about people who have darker skin. Like it's like it's something that you have to take time considering what you're doing. Did you have something to add?
No.
You're spacing out. You're like rebooting again.
No, I was just angry.
Yeah. Angry 24/7. That's what I do with everything. Are there any other questions or? Yeah, that's a good question.
It's almost 9, so
Um,
I guess we can have like one more question.
yeah, we can take one more question. Otherwise, we will set you free. Like, let you go.
I guess that's it then.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we'll set you free, don't worry. But thank you again for coming to this workshop on a Thursday night with it raining very heavily outside. We'll be here for like another couple minutes if you want to, if you had any questions maybe you wanted to ask in private.
120 seconds.
Yeah, 120 seconds. And I will probably, I know I'll be posting my slides. I'll make my slides public. I don't know about.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you can post the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so probably we'll be posting up the slides in case you want to review them again, because I know there were some that had like a bunch of writing on them. Yeah, thank you.
No, I can't comment on the slider because as someone who